Sifting through the lies of January 6th. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I am your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. It's been 30 months, 33 months or so, 34 months. It's been a long time since January 6th. And in America, average Americans, I believe, are still trying to scratch their heads and figure out what exactly went on January 6th. Is it as bad as the government says, an uprising, an insurrection, a concerted attack to take over the U.S. Congress and just drive out the politicians and yada yada, a violent uprising and so forth? Or is it like some on the politically right say that it was just simply totally peaceful gathering, nothing to see here, folks, go home, and that all the violence was really staged by plants of the government itself? Well, we don't have a full picture until now, and I have a guest today who has done some deep dive research into January 6th, and she will go into some of her findings. So, you know what? At the very least, you can have some information that differs from what the government itself puts out. And isn't that what journalism is supposed to be anyhow? But before I get into all that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at washingtontimes.com, where you may also subscribe to my newsletter called Bold and Blunt with Cheryl Chumley. Just scroll to the bottom of washingtontimes.com, find the newsletter section, and sign up for it. You'll get Monday, Wednesday, Friday delivered to your email box. My newsletter, which contains all my commentaries that I write, giving you the bullet points you need to fight the far leftists and deep staters of America, as well as my Tuesday and Thursday Bold and Blunt podcasts. But you may also get Bold and Blunt at Real Life Network. That is the faith-based news outreach program of Pastor Jack Hibbs out in California. And you may get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are offered. If you look at the news today, all you see is a financial landscape that's growing more and more dangerous. That's right, dangerous. And if you have retirement funds, like I do, you have to be concerned. Stubborn inflation, soaring interest rates, astronomical debt can all drain the value of your retirement funds. And to make things even worse, the government is now targeting 401ks and IRAs with heavy new taxes to pay for, get this, the government's social justice agenda. Dangerous times, as I said. The good news is that there is one little known strategy that can protect your financial future. What is it? I'm talking about the Gold IRA from American Hartford Gold. This Gold IRA strategy can shield your wealth from this economic meltdown. And the best part is this method is tax and penalty free. Analysts predict that gold is set to hit all-time highs. You know this. And if you have retirement funds, you just can't afford to lose. Now is the time to call the most trustworthy precious metal dealer, American Hartford Gold. They'll show you how to protect your savings and retirement accounts by diversifying your portfolio with physical gold and silver. With the finest products, amazing customer service, and get this, a buyback commitment. American Hartford Gold has earned a 5-star rating from thousands of reviews and an A+ from the Better Business Bureau. That's what makes them so trustworthy. Get this, tell them I sent you, and they'll give you up to $5,000 of free silver on your first order. So call them now. 866-525-4680. That's 866-525-4680. Or text BOLD to 65532. Again, 866-525-4680 or text BOLD to 65532. The government on January 6th. This is what the Justice Department put out in a press release on July 6th. On July 6, 2023, 30 months, the headline said, since the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Okay, so justice has been busily trying to bring justice to the situation. And as part of their accountability program, they have made, Justice Department says, more than 1,069 defendants have been charged. They have made 1,069 arrests in nearly all 50 states, as well as the District of Columbia. My, justice has been busy, hasn't it? Geez. You would think if they put that amount of effort towards, say, securing America's borders, well, we wouldn't have any illegals in America at all. Anyhow, government's got its priorities, right? Approximately 350 defendants have been charged with assaulting, resisting, or impeding officers or employees. Justice writes. Resisting, impeding officers. Impeding, that just means not running away as quickly as you should have, including approximately 110 individuals who have been charged with using a deadly or dangerous weapon, which, by the way, it can be anything, right? A pencil can be a deadly weapon. A fist, your hand can be a deadly weapon, or causing serious bodily injury to an officer. Approximately 140 police officers were assaulted January 6th at the Capitol, Justice says, including about 80 from the U.S. Capitol Police and about 60 from the Metropolitan Police Department. Interesting, because other people say differently. Anyhow, approximately 594 individuals have pleaded guilty to a variety of federal charges, many of whom faced or will face incarceration at sentencing. About 160 have pleaded guilty to felonies, Justice reports. Another 434 have pleaded guilty to misdemeanors. A total of 68 of those who have pleaded guilty to felonies have pleaded to federal charges of assaulting law enforcement officers, and approximately 36 additional defendants have pleaded guilty to feloniously obstructing, impeding, or interfering with a law enforcement officer during a civil disorder. Of these 104 defendants, 76 have now been sentenced to prison terms of up to 150 months. One more quick fact. 4 of those who have pleaded guilty to felonies have pleaded guilty to the federal charge of seditious conspiracy. Wow, it sounds really bad. It sounds like an armed insurrection that just took over Capitol Hill, and all the politicians had to run and scurry for cover. Well, make that all the non-MAGA politicians. All the Democrats had to flee. And the police were totally assaulted, totally put in positions where they couldn't even pull their guns, and they certainly couldn't push back, and they couldn't control the crowds. They were victims. The police were victims. The police were victimized. Well, guess what? There are other stories out there that say differently. And the problem here is sifting through the lies versus truths of January 6th, because you don't just have the government claiming that they were assaulted and victimized by Trump supporters, those dastardly, deplorable Trump supporters, right? Carrying weapons and just randomly targeting offices on Capitol Hill for an insurrection. But you have the media. You have the media carrying the water of that narrative too, without really doing a due diligence dive, right? That's the problem. The media is supposed to be the watchdog. The media is supposed to be the safeguard between the government and the citizens, and helping citizens discern truth of what government says. But too often today we have the media just putting forth the bullet points, taking the press releases that come out of the Democrats' offices. It's never done for Republicans, but out of the Democrats' offices, and they report those. They basically put them on their teleprompters and read from them, and then those go out as truths. Those go out as the talking points for the Democrat Party to take to the next network, to take to social media, to carry out on X, formerly Twitter, and just, run with headlines about the whatever the agenda is that the Democrat Party wants to put out. And so we have the Democrat Party, we have the leftists, and we have some in the Republican Party who have pushed the narrative that it was utter chaos on Capitol Hill that day, and that it was completely out of control MAGA supporters who committed acts of violence resulting in serious injuries and even deaths of many on Capitol Hill, and police as well as politicians were among the victims of these vicious crimes and criminals. So what's the truth here? Thankfully, Lara Logan, investigative journalist with a long, stellar career in investigating as a journalist, which is really that's not even supposed to be a special tag. Journalist is supposed to be investigative by nature, or at least questioning, right? But she has a long and stellar career of investigative journalism, and she has put her inquisitive nature and her investigative skills and talents to work to look at January 6th and put out this 14-part docuseries called The Rest of the Story, looking at the truths of January 6th. And guess what? There are some victims out there who aren't government officials, right? Some of them are actually civilians and families who have been decimated by the lies told by government operatives because they had an agenda to use January 6th for political purposes. Lara Logan, I want to thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. It is so great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to learn that you've been taking this deeper look at January 6th and what's been going on, and you've been doing these special segments. Just speaking in general, what are we missing in America about January 6th?
We're missing a lot. I think the biggest thing is that the police, as well as the protesters, seem to have been set up, to be quite frank. And I know that there are things that happen on both sides that should not have happened and that do not speak well of people. But it's very easy to set the conditions for chaos. And when you don't put real security in place, and yet you know that you're going to have overwhelming numbers of people, and you supposedly see these people as the biggest existential threat to the United States, it doesn't add up. If somebody told you that there was going to be a march through your neighborhood and it was going to be a whole lot of bad people, you would lock things down. And that's not what happened on January 6th.
How should we even be characterizing January 6th? Because we can't even reach a consensus on whether it was an insurrection, a protest, a rally. How do you see it? Because you've done the research now.
Well, I find it very frustrating when people even use the word insurrection. It's just, quite frankly, it's just stupid, because there is no... An insurrection, first of all, has to be armed, and one or two people, somebody sneaking in a knife because they're an idiot, or having a firearm that was never discharged. This is not an insurrection. This requires, if you're going to take over the United States Congress, you're going to have to hold it. So how are you going to hold it? What's the plan to hold it? There was no plan for that. Well, people might say, well, they were hoping that Donald Trump would come back. That's not a plan. So it's just frustrating to me, because I have been on the ground. I have witnessed insurrections before in other places, and it's so obviously that that's a complete, and that's a lie. Now, was this a protest? Yes. Did parts of this turn into a riot? Yes. But that doesn't change the fact that hundreds of thousands of people were there protesting. So I guess if you want to use the same standard, then what you have is it was a protest until it was declared a riot. Except, unfortunately, the Capitol Police and the Metropolitan Police Department did not do what you would normally do in a situation like that, which is to announce to everybody, making sure that everybody knows that this is now a riot and you have this amount of time to disperse. That didn't happen. And if you watched, say, for example, Portland during the so-called Summer of Love, you would see that night after night the police would say, okay, this is now a riot. And this has been declared a riot, and you have, X amount of time to leave. But none of that ever happened. So, but I think what we should call January 6th what it really was, which was a setup by both Democrats and Republicans.
What are we to make of these videos that I think all of us have seen by now of police seemingly stepping aside to let those on Capitol Hill that day pass into the Capitol or opening doors for them? What's the context of that?
Well, that's a very good question because this has affected so many people. And time and again, I have people saying to me, I didn't know I was doing anything wrong because the police were fist bumping people, because we were taking selfies with police officers and so on. And so as far as I can tell, the Capitol obviously is vast. And you had the Senate side and you had the House side. You had the East and the West. And the situation was very different depending on where you were and also when you were there. And it appears from what we know from whistleblowers like Tariq Johnson, a Capitol Police officer for 23 years, who was actually very senior. He was in charge of evacuating the Senate chamber and had been there a very long time. If you look at what Tariq Johnson says, he tells you that he was screaming down the radio and nothing was coming back. Nothing. They were looking for orders, they were looking for direction, and they weren't getting it. Well, who were they not getting it from? Well, the Capitol Police has several deputies. Steve Sund was the chief, and he was in charge of trying to get the help that he needed, the reinforcements, the bigger picture coordination, the political stuff, and so on. So it fell to his deputy, his operations chief, who should have been running the show, except it wasn't him running the show. It was another deputy who was head of intelligence. And this woman, Yogananda Pittman, was sitting in the operations center where the operations chief should have been. And I said to Tariq Johnson once, I said, well, I mean, they have the same rank officially. Could he not have told her to just get out of the chair and take it over? Because it was obvious to many police officers that day, not just to Tariq Johnson, that Yogananda Pittman was not doing the job. I can't even say her job because it wasn't her job. And he laughed and he said to me, please, nobody told that woman what to do. She was kind of anointed. And so what you start to see is that there are hallmarks of a classic operation here where they set the conditions for chaos. And I think that sometimes Capitol Police were getting one direction, and in other places, at other moments, they were getting different direction. And when I say it was a setup, it's not like every single Capitol Police officer knew. That's not how this works. When you run an operation like this from the point of view of those people who made sure that they did, that the right things were in place for chaos to ensue, when you speak to those people, you understand that all they need is a few individuals with placement and access, right? If you're in the right place, like Yogananda Pittman put herself in the right place. She put herself in the epicenter, and she had access to everything. And so with a few people like that in key positions, you can really set the conditions for things to go the way that you want them. That doesn't mean that you can predict that, say, for example, I know Roseanne Boyland is going to be on the stairs just outside the tunnel at this moment. It doesn't work that way. It just means that you know human nature. And you know that when you put enough people in a situation like that, and you have squads of people that are pushing from behind, forcing people forward, and you know that the police are going to push back, you know that you're going to have people get hurt, right? You don't have to know how many. You don't have to know exactly which ones. It's enough for you to know if you put that, make sure that that's in place in enough parts of the Capitol, then people will get hurt. You'll get the outcome that you want. And what is very confusing for a lot of people that were there on January 6th is that they weren't hearing alarms, they weren't hearing announcements on a loud hailer, and they were going through areas where the police seemed to be giving them permission. The problem for those people is that now that they're in court, the judges are just not allowing that as a defense. They're just ruling it out and tossing it aside. They're also tossing aside all the evidence of informants, confidential human sources, and undercover agents on the ground. They're tossing out the defense of, lack of mens rea being criminal intent. They're tossing that out as well. So these things are not even allowed to factor into these cases as that go before these juries, and there are juries that are hearing these cases time and time again, and there's no sequestering of any jury. So it's a complete disaster from the point of view of those people who really genuinely did not have any idea that they were doing something that was illegal.
And let's talk about the media's role in this for a minute, because not only have you done this investigation and this research, but you've been in media for years and years, so you understand how media can spin things, can show a bias while pretending not showing a bias. One of the things I found maddening is that even after the facts were out about the so-called many deaths on Capitol Hill that day, the mainstream media still reports some of those who died by suicide or by other factors after January 6, days after, even a couple weeks after in some respects, as deaths tied to January 6. Can you speak to that?
Yes, it's a very significant thing that you're picking up on there, because it's really a sleight of hand. What they do is they shift the narrative. They go from saying 5 police officers were killed, or 1 police officer, Sicknick, was killed that day. And then they say, instead of 5 died that day, they say that 5 died as a result.
Yes.
January 6th. And they just slip in those little words there. It's the same way. Do you remember Nicholas Sandman, who was at the Lincoln Memorial? He was
yes.
a young Covington kid, right? Remember initially there was a flurry of reporting about Nathan Phillips, the Native Indian man
yep.
that got into this standoff, right? And what they said was he was a veteran. He was a Vietnam vet. And then when it was exposed that Nathan Phillips, his military record, was released, and it was obvious that he had never been a veteran, then they said he was a Vietnam era.
Exactly.
The word era. They quickly say, well, he was a veteran of that era.
Yes.
We happened to be in the military during that decade. And it's ridiculous, because he wasn't anything of the sort, nor did he claim to be a Vietnam era veteran. He said, and I found this video, I actually put it in one of the stories I reported on in my show, No Agenda. Nathan Phillips was in this video describing how his humiliation, this woman who spat on him in the streets when he was in his uniform, and how, terrifying it was to go anywhere in his uniform, and, in this time, because people treated you so badly, blah, blah, blah. So if anyone bothered to look or do their homework, they could have exposed very easily the fact that the media was totally and utterly lying to protect this guy that they wanted to be a hero, even though he was a dirtbag. And that's what they do with January 6th. And that's why so many people out there still have the impression that, 5 people were killed, or that Donald Trump is, a Russian asset, or that Russia won the election for Trump, or that Hunter Biden's laptop wasn't real, right? They never quite come out and acknowledge the truth. So it doesn't matter when you catch them in a lie. They shift the language, and they get away with it because they have information dominance. There's nobody holding them to account, and you still get leaders. This is the other very important part of the pillar, right? So if you look at a lie as having no legs, so you have this massive lie of January 6th that all these police officers died or were murdered by protesters, because that's what they said, right? Brian Sicknick was murdered by protesters who bashed his head in with a fire extinguisher. Poor Officer Sicknick. That's not at all what happened. But if you look at what happens afterwards, you get Brian Sicknick lies in state. His party lies in state. You tell me what Capitol Police officer who ever died of a stroke or a heart attack or even in the line of duty lay in state and had the whole of Congress file past their coffin and this live funeral. Do you remember a funeral like that for anybody else?
That's a good point. That's a really good point. And
so these are the other pillars of the lie, you see, and this is how they get away with continuing to lie, is that the leaders, the people that planted that lie in the media in the first place, continue the lie, and they all get away with it.
So looking at this lie, which is continuing today, and I know our time's running short, so I'll just finish with this question and then we'll talk directly about your segments. So and you can explain how people can watch them and so forth. But speaking to this continuance of lie, who are the real victims here? When you look back and you sift through all the truths versus lies and come up with what you found to be true, who are the real victims?
Sadly, the real victims are American citizens, innocent Americans all over this country, whose families have been torn apart, whose lives have been completely destroyed. And beyond them, the impact, right, for all those people who don't want to stand up now and speak their mind because they're afraid. I mean, the real victim here is the truth. I know that doesn't have a name and a face on it, but that's the reality that we're dealing with. Is that the price of standing up now for what you believe in is so high that fewer and fewer and fewer people are willing to do that. So really, the impact of January 6th is ongoing, and it's very difficult to measure, because I could tell you about, for example, a mother in a small town, in northern Minnesota, who's going to lose her husband and her 3 sons to jail because of January 6th, and that would give you, a name and a face, right? Aaron James and his brothers, Aaron James, who was a medic in the Navy and put American soldiers together back on the battlefields, and is an extraordinary man, absolutely breathtaking in his strength and in his courage. And he and his brothers are all going away. Why? I mean, because he picked up a shield to shield the people that were, the protesters that were trying to give life, resuscitate a protester, Roseanne Boyland, who was dying, and they were being gassed. And so Aaron James and his brother picked up shields from the ground to cover them so that they could continue to try to save Roseanne Boyland's life. These people are facing up to 20 years in prison for, I think it's assault with a deadly weapon in Aaron James's case, even though he hit no one, tried to hit no one, had no intention of striking anyone, but just the fact that he picked up that shield. That's what they're going after him for. So there's some truly evil things happening here. And what we have now, a Justice Department and a law enforcement agency in the form of the FBI, who have been turned against the American people. So we have yet to feel the true cost of January 6th, because when a nation like this loses faith in its own law enforcement, when you lose that line of separation, when you now become a nation that jails your political opposition and uses your justice system as a political weapon, you are now like a dictatorship. I mean, that's how you're functioning. And so the price of that is really immeasurable. And what is the impact on young people? Why would any young person today say that that they don't agree with anything in the progressive platform? Because look what's going to happen to them. They're going to be, if they disagree in a test at school, if they don't follow the narrative in their work, in their reading of history, in their reading of novels, in their application of geography, I mean, really, you name it. The young people today are forced into giving progressive answers to everything. Otherwise, they fail. If they try in college to go against that, they get targeted. And if they, in the workplace, say anything about it, they get targeted again. And now they've been shown that not only will you not get into college, but there's a very good chance you're going to jail. And by the way, you might get locked up and they throw the key away without you ever being convicted, because they've done it to people like Colt Maccabee, who's finally now, his case is in trial almost 3 years after he was imprisoned, a deputy sheriff from Tennessee who tried to save Roseanne Boyland as well, and did actually save one of the police officers who was pulled by his ankle and pulled into the crowd. And Colt McAfee put his body over him. And what did this government, what did the FBI do? They took the sound out of that video. They took that officer's body cam. And so they showed, Colt McAfee smothering him with his body. And if you take the audio out, you can't hear him saying to the police officer, "I'm trying to help you, man." And the officer saying, "Yes, I know you are. I know you are." And he says, "Do you think you can stand? I'm going to get you back." And he says, not yet. And he's like, "Get up, tell me when. Tell me when you can stand, and I'll help you." And he helps him, and he gets him back to the police and returns him. And they thank him. And what did the FBI do? They went on the stand at his at his sentencing, not sentencing hearing, at his pretrial detention hearing. And they said, "Oh, there's a problem with the video. There's no audio." Because all you can see in the video is Colt McAfee on top of this police officer.
Wow.
I mean, this is the kind of Justice Department we have today. This is the kind of FBI we have today. How can you measure the cost of that when you have people who are willing to lie on the stand? And we only know that they lied because, there's a guy, Gary McBride, who dug up the original video and showed that it didn't have any audio problems. And so we know that they gave it to the judge in that, who was the judge? Emmett Sullivan. Now that name should be familiar to a lot of people because Emmett Sullivan was the guy who was going after General Michael Flynn. He's the guy that when Bill Barr said, "Hey, Justice Department did an illegal, and immoral prosecution of this individual, and we're dropping the case." Judge Sullivan refused to drop it. He wanted blood so badly that he defied the Attorney General. That's the country that we live in today. That's the legacy of January 6th,
Wow.
is that Americans all over this nation know that the Justice Department, the FBI, they are not on the side of justice. They don't care about the truth. They will cheat, lie, steal. They will do anything they have to do. They will destroy evidence. They will perjure themselves. They will do anything they can to go after decent American citizens for nothing other than the crime of exercising their First Amendment rights, or basically for what they believe in.
They may know a little bit of it, but they don't know all the details that you're putting forward, which is why I think your docuseries is crucial for Americans to watch. So you have a 14-part series. You just wrapped, I think it's the 3rd episode,
Yes.
and you put it out there on X, formerly Twitter, and it's got a couple million viewers so far. Talk about how people can watch this series on January 6th, where they can get it, any highlights that you want to spend the last couple minutes discussing.
Well, the episodes come out on a Thursday. You can find them on Truth and Media, on X, or on Sovereign Media online, or you can find it by just searching my name, The Rest of the Story with Lara Logan. And the next episode will be out this Thursday. That's part 2 of the Brunson Brothers.
Okay. The rest of the story is what the docuseries is called. Lara Logan, thank you so much for doing the research in this, because I don't think Americans know just how despicable our government has become. I really appreciate your time on Bold and Blunt.
Oh, thank you so much. I so enjoyed talking to you. I'll come back anytime you want.
Absolutely. Again, that was Lara Logan, investigative journalist, and you are definitely going to want to check out her docuseries on January 6th. The rest of the story. I want to thank you for listening to Bold and Blunt. If you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at WashingtonTimes.com, at Edify.app, at Real Life Network, and wherever podcasts are offered. And one quick mention about your retirement funds. Safeguard your retirement savings with American Hartford Gold, right? American Hartford Gold, 866-525-4680. That is the number to call, or text BOLD to 65532. Tell them I sent you, and don't forget, tell them that, because they'll give you up to $5,000 of free silver on your first order. BOLD to 65532. And speaking of bold, tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, stay blunt and bold.